You're listening to CITR 101.9 FM. This is Democracy Watch, the News Collective's weekly hour-long news report, bringing you alternative and undercovered current affairs from Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. I'm Alex DeBoer. Today I'm alone in studio. It's Thursday, September 6th. It's a beautiful day. It's 5:03 p.m., and we are broadcasting from UBC's Vancouver campus on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. So today we have a short but worthwhile episode of Democracy Watch. With less than a month and a half before Vancouver's 2018 municipal election, we will be zooming in on that particular matter. As it happens, today's show is focused a lot on Yes Vancouver, or civic issues that relate to Yes Vancouver. And for listeners who don't know, Yes Vancouver is one of a few of the new municipal parties we have this year who are vying for power in our October 20th election. The party began after its mayoral candidate, Hector Bremner, a sitting NPA councillor, had his request to run for mayor with the NPA rejected by the party. This was big municipal drama a few months ago. So in response, Bremner started his own party and is running for mayor under their banner. So today's show features a report from Yes Vancouver's candidate announcement meeting, which happened at the end of July. It took us a while to get this piece together. And so during this meeting, this event, myself, Alex DeBoer, and Zubin Shroff Marabadi were there reporting, and we had an opportunity to interview Hector Bremner. So we chatted with him about how he plans to solve social ills in Vancouver, such as homelessness, without raising taxes, which is something that he has committed to not doing. So after we got his take on this, we then spoke with an Econ professor, which took us a while to track down because it was August and there were no professors available to chat with. So we finally reached someone, and this is the person we talked to is Kevin Milligan, who's an econ professor here at UBC. So we had him give comment on Hector's strategy for dealing with the housing crisis while also dealing with social justice issues in the city. And before we go to that interview, we have another interview that I did today with a representative from Elections BC, which is a nonpartisan group that basically makes sure our elections happen properly and within the laws. So if you've been paying attention to Vancouver politics, if you're on Twitter, or if there's been at least one article about this, maybe more. If you've been tuned in, there's a lot of buzz about some new billboards that are around Vancouver. And these billboards promote, once again, Hector Bremner and his party, Yes Vancouver, and their hashtag slogan, Let's Fix Housing. So we have these new limits on campaign spending, which I'm going to get into more in the coming pieces. But because of these limits, third-party advertising is actually really important in this election, because third parties are allowed to spend as much as they want on advertising for parties up until September 22nd, which is when the campaign period actually begins. And after that, there are limits, but they still have quite a bit of space to spend. So there's a group that put up these billboards around Vancouver, and they're called Vancouverites for Affordable Housing. And there's been a bit of mystery behind them because the phone number that is on their billboard has been called by reporters. I called them, other concerned citizens have called them, and no one answers. And then if you email them, no one replies. So it's there's been a bit of mystery. Some people have speculated that, well, it's probably Hector's party who's actually behind these billboards and that they've invented this group. Can't know for sure. There's a really good article in the Georgia Straight about this, where the party's secretary is asked about this, and he says that he doesn't know who the group is, and our guess is as good as his. So that's what Yes Vancouver's saying. So we will go to that interview now, and you can decide what you think about it. I'm just going to pull that up now. So this is an interview I did with a representative from Elections BC. Enjoy.
Hello. Thank you for calling Vancouverites for Affordable Housing. We are unable to come to the phone right now, but please email us at vancouverites4affordablehousing@outlook.com. Thank you.
You may have noticed some new billboards around Vancouver promoting Hector Bremner, mayoral candidate for the new municipal party, Yes Vancouver. With BC's new legislation banning union and corporate donations, advertising budgets for political parties have shrunk. This has left space for third parties to pick up the slack. In the case of Hector Bremner and Yes Vancouver, a group called Vancouverites for Affordable Housing has put up billboards endorsing his candidacy. This has drawn suspicion. The group, which has its phone number printed on the billboards, hasn't answered any calls or returned any emails from inquiring reporters and concerned citizens. Is this group legally allowed to evade transparency to the public? And do they have to register in order to advertise as a third party in Vancouver's 2018 municipal election? My name is Alex DeBoer, and earlier today I called Elections BC to find out. So I'm just recording now. Could we start out by you telling me your name and your role at Elections BC?
Sure. I'm Andrew Watson, and I'm the communications manager here at Elections BC.
Could you tell me what Elections BC is? Like, as an organization, what you do?
Sure. Elections BC is a non-partisan, independent office of the legislature. So the chief electoral officer is an officer of the legislature, who is appointed based on unanimous recommendation of the Legislative Assembly. And our role is to administer the provincial electoral process under the provisions of the Election Act. And we also administer electoral events in British Columbia under different pieces of legislation. So we administer referenda. We administer the Recall and Initiative Act. And we also administer campaign financing and advertising rules at the local level in BC for municipal elections, though we do not administer voting in local elections in BC or candidate nominations or other aspects of local elections.
Okay, so you said you administer local elections campaign financing rules. So does that mean that you sort of police them or you enforce them?
Yeah, so our role is to ensure that the provisions of the Local Elections Campaign Financing Act are being followed. We do that in a number of ways. We educate political participants and the public about what the rules are for local elections in BC. And we also have authority under the Act to take enforcement actions if necessary. But our first step in any sort of non-compliance situation with that act would always be one of educating people about what the rules are and bringing them into compliance through education.
Okay. I'm curious about the third-party role that groups are playing in Vancouver's municipal election. So the Local Elections Campaign Financing Act regulates third-party advertising during the 28-day campaign period, which starts in September 22nd and ends on the election day on October 20th. So before that campaign period starts, I believe third parties are able to spend as much as they want to support candidates and parties. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there are expense limits for third-party advertising sponsors under the Local Elections Campaign Financing Act. Those expense limits apply during the campaign period that you mentioned. So from September 22nd to October 20th, which is general voting day for the local elections. Outside of that period, those expense limits don't apply. There are directed advertising expense limits at the local level, and those vary by jurisdiction. So there's different limits depending on the jurisdiction and election area you're in the province. and that applies to directed advertising, so advertising about a candidate or an elector organization. And there's also a cumulative advertising limit of $150,000. And that limit applies to directed and issue-based advertising in all election areas, and the total value of advertising sponsored can't exceed that limit. And again, those limits both apply during the campaign period.
Okay. So can you tell me who qualifies as a third party?
Well, third-party advertising is any election advertising being conducted during the campaign period that's not sponsored by a candidate or an elector organization. So that can be election advertising sponsored by an individual or an organization. If they are sponsoring advertising during the campaign period, they need to register with our office before conducting that advertising, include their name and contact information on their advertising, and then file a disclosure statement with us after the election that covers who they raised money from and how it was spent. And again, the expense limits would also apply during that campaign period.
Okay. So the group Vancouverites for Affordable Housing, have they registered with you?
They hadn't as of yesterday, the last time I checked our list of registered sponsors. If a group is conducting advertising outside of the campaign period, they can register with us. They're not required to.
Okay.
But again, once the campaign period comes into effect, any individual organization conducting third-party advertising would need to register. And we update the list of registered sponsors on our website on a daily basis.
Okay, so once the campaign period begins on September 22nd, does that mean that if this group, Vancouverites for Affordable Housing, has not registered with Elections BC, they'll be required to take down billboards and any postings they have in support of a party?
If a group continues to conduct third-party advertising during the campaign period, then they would be required to register before doing that, yes.
Okay. Have you been receiving questions regarding their advertising for Yes Vancouver?
We have received inquiries from the public and inquiries from the media on that topic, yes.
Okay, yeah, because their phone number no one answers, and they give an email which no one's also replied to. I'm wondering, with third-party groups, how distinct is the line between these groups and political members of parties? So, like, could you be a member of Yes Vancouver and also be part of a group that is sponsoring third-party advertising?
Well, third-party sponsors have to be independent from candidates and elector organizations in that they can't sponsor advertising together. So that's one of the things that we look at when we register a third-party sponsor. There's various information that they provide as part of the registration process. And one of the things we look at is, is this individual organization independent enough from a candidate or an elector organization to be registered as a third party.
Okay, so you look at it on an individual basis, meaning that if you look at an organization and, 5 of their 200 members are members of the party that they're advertising on behalf of, that would maybe be okay?
I'd have to follow up with our local elections campaign financing team on, the specific criteria they look at. But certainly under the legislation, a third-party sponsor has to sponsor advertising independently from an elector organization or civic political party or a candidate.
Right. Okay, so for now, before the campaign period begins, essentially third parties are able to advertise as much as they want without disclosing their campaign advertising, their financials to you, to Elections BC. Is that correct then?
Yeah, the rules for third parties come into effect during the campaign period. So it applies to third parties who are conducting advertising during the campaign period, and those advertisers would be required to meet the requirements under LECPA. So in terms of disclosure, again, the registration and attribution requirements and the others we've covered.
Right, yeah. So then if a group like Vancouverites for Affordable Housing hasn't registered with you by September 22nd, how will you enforce the Campaign Financing Act? Will you call them and request that they take down billboards, or first step is talking to them, you said, right?
Yes, we would certainly follow up on any inquiry or complaint we received regarding any third-party advertising that's being conducted outside of the rules under LECFA that's being conducted during the campaign period. That education is usually our first step in cases like this, and if necessary, we could conduct an investigation.
Okay. I'm wondering if since the Election Campaign Financing Act, the Local Elections Campaign Financing Act, that is a new part of our elections in BC, our election process, if third-party advertising is maybe a loophole that in the future will be closed.
Well, our role is to administer the law as passed by the Legislative Assembly. So any sort of public policy issues around, why the rules have been established the way they are or what they should be, falls under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Mm-hmm. They're responsible for the actual legislation itself. Our role is to administer the provisions of that legislation in a neutral manner for all of the political participants involved.
Right. And then at the end of the election season, do you give some sort of report detailing complaints or issues that you have flagged as an organization to legislators?
Yes, we do. We often, we table a post-event report for any sort of event we administer with the Legislative Assembly. And we will make recommendations within keeping with our nonpartisan role as part of that report, or draw things to legislators' attention that they may wish to consider from a policy perspective.
Cool. I think that those are all my questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks again for the call.
You as well. Goodbye.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. You're listening to Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. You just heard an interview that I did. My name's Alex DeBoer with a representative from Elections BC on third-party advertising rules in Vancouver's 2018 municipal election. We're going to go to a short break, and then we're back with another piece this one was sort of about. The one coming up is definitely about Yes Vancouver. So if you're interested to hear about them, stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Old or New Testament?
I think the New Testament.
The question is, Pilate. Remember Pilate from the New Testament?
What does Pilate? He fiddled well.
Yeah, no, well, just a minute. Let me ask the question, then you can give me the answer, okay? Did Pilate want Jesus to be crucified?
Pontius Pilate washed his hands of it.
So did he want him to be crucified?
Yeah.
No. No. No.
Well, tune in every Friday afternoon, 3:30 to the Night Rush Show on CITR.
Well, find a good church. It'll help you.
Crimes and Treasons Radio. This is Riff Raff. Every Tuesday from 9 to 11 p.m. on 101.9 FM.
Yes, you and I rocking with the best. 101.9 CITR Radio. Crimes and Treasons, this is your boy Just Blaze. Right now you're rocking with Jules Andre Brown, Rolly Bells, Jamal Steels, and Horsepower. You know what it is, all right?
Yo, it's Iron Sue, man. I want to shout out Crimes and Treasons Radio, man. CRTR 101.9, man. Turn up, turn up, turn up, turn up, turn up.
Question. Do you like fat electronic beats? Do you like serene ambient vibes? Do you like groovy disco? Do you wish you could listen to them all on the same show? Well, you can. Join me, Galen, every Thursday from 11 to noon as I spend an hour mixing and meandering through underground tunes from the local dance scene and beyond. It's called UDU Radio. See you then.
All right, and we're back. You're listening to Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. My name is Alex DeBoer, and I now have a fellow News Collective member with me in the studio. Want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Zubin. What's up?
Cool.
Here to talk
Not
about
much.
Yes Vancouver.
Not much is up. Cool. So, as I mentioned in the top of the episode, we have a piece on Yes Vancouver, a new civic party in Vancouver vying for power. Their mayoral candidate is Hector Bremner. So Zubin and I, in the summer, the end of July, I think it was July 28th, we went to a candidate announcement meeting at the Polish Community Hall, Community Center, which was at like Fraser and King's and King Edward. Yeah, so they had food there and coffee, which was nice. So they had some money for that. That was nice. I got a seat at the front for me and Zubin. What was it like being there? Like, so it was fancier than the other ones because we've gone to quite a few party candidate selection meetings.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know if it was that much fancier, but
maybe.
And part of it kind of felt like a new party in terms of watching them like go through their candidate speeches.
Yeah.
And so forth, because they had like some mild technical difficulties.
Oh, they had
and,
some
like,
real technical difficulties.
A little bit of setup with their stage.
Yeah, like, so what happened is there was a woman who was hosting, and the mic kept like not working, and cutting out.
Party president.
Oh, is she the party president? Maybe.
I believe so.
Okay, so yeah, the mic kept cutting out, so that sucked for them. And then I remember one of the first things that happened was it when Hector went up or someone went up and they were like, everyone take out a 20.
Oh,
and
yeah, right.
Put
It was like a church moment where they basically passed around a guy with like a jar or a box to collect donations.
Yeah, and they recommended everyone take out a 20.
Yeah.
Which is something...
an interesting moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's something you like, for example, we were at the NPA candidate selection meeting. That did not happen. But they definitely would probably be taking donations, but they didn't have that kind of like direct reach or like, I don't know, I guess like Zubin, like you say, there's like very much the markings of a new party kind of like trying to get funding and make it. But I think also parties on like the left probably wouldn't do that. Like COPE probably wouldn't do that.
Well, yeah, and they certain. I mean, based on their political leanings, they probably wouldn't tell you how much to give.
Yeah,
it would be more of a pay what you can approach, I would assume.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, you didn't have to give a 20.
No, of course.
But yeah, so then the candidates did their speeches, and they're running 5 city council candidates, which plus Hector as the mayor, which means that if they get all those people elected, they will have a majority on council, which is what most of the parties on the right are doing. Versus the left with the Vancouver Labour and District Council, they've entered an agreement on the left where all the parties will only run a certain number of candidates so that they have a better chance of, as a whole on the left, quote unquote left, having a majority on council. So the groups on the right are a little bit more like self-serving, I guess, in that way, or
perhaps they're just not as organized to the same degree.
Perhaps.
When you look at parties like Yes Vancouver that are split off from the NPA, it kind of makes sense that, especially since it's still recent, that they aren't like in some form of coalition yet.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah. And then, okay, so then they had a video. So there's a lot of videos with Yes Vancouver that you can see online, and they played a video on stage, and they had these block letters cut out that said yes. But then they kind of like didn't move them fast enough, so they were blocking like the video for a bit. But you know, it was like fun. It was energetic. Again, I liked the food and the coffee. Yeah. So then at the end, we interviewed Hector Bremner. So you're going to hear some of that interview. And then at the end, when things were wrapping up, we ended up chatting with Mark Marison, who is Christy Clark's ex-husband, who's involved. I don't think he's maybe he is the campaign manager. I think he is the campaign manager for Yes Vancouver. And so we chatted with him a bit, and when we had arrived, there were sort of enough chairs for everyone to sit in, but as people continued coming in, they ended up not having enough chairs. And then I saw people working for Yes Vancouver pull out more chairs. So I asked Mark about this because it struck me as perhaps planned. And he said, oh yeah, for sure. Like, we planned that. Like, we intentionally didn't put out enough chairs. And I was like, all right. So made me feel
he's an experienced
insightful.
Campaign manager.
Yeah. So exactly. So that's my point, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of energy. I've heard Yes Vancouver described as being at one of their events as being sort of like attending a party. And so that's often a sign of a party on the rise, is one that's sort of exciting and optimistic and energetic. And so, think of that what you will. Yeah, so then for this piece, we chatted with Hector about his solution to both Vancouver's housing crisis and Vancouver's social woes. So, I don't know. Anything to add before we go to the piece, Zubin?
Yeah, I mean, it basically covers Hector's main point that he wants to increase housing supply, and through that increase in supply that the city will have more revenues in general to deal with every other kind of issue.
Yeah. And we should say that we're aware that Yes Vancouver recently released a preview of their more detailed housing plan. And so, of course, we're talking about his strategy very broadly, right? But zoomed in, it's going to have more detail. And while he doesn't want to introduce taxes to Vancouver citizens, he is interested in introducing a speculation tax on foreign buyers. So
and it was quite, I don't know what the right word to describe it is, like ambitious, perhaps, or but yeah, it was suggested as 50% of the profits on unimproved homes.
Yes.
Which, of course, I'm interested in what they mean by unimproved, but
yeah, absolutely.
That will remain to be in some kind of follow-up, perhaps.
Yeah, so if you're interested in hearing or reading a preview of Yes Vancouver's housing strategy in more detail, you can find that on their Facebook page and stuff, but that'll be unrolling more in coming days, just like most parties are still unrolling a lot of details about their strategies. So, all right, let's go to this piece. We hope that you like it. We've titled it Econ 101. Just having some trouble loading it. Obviously, this would happen. Oh, there we go. Okay, here we go. Enjoy. How would you feel about Yes Vancouver being called MPA Light?
Well, we're going the Vision Light, MPA Light. It's okay. It's fine. We actually are a party made up of MPA and Vision people. So the reality is that the MPA and Vision are extraordinarily unpopular. They've failed us completely. MPA, until I came along, had 78 members and no money, no message, no motion, nothing. There was nothing going on. They've been sitting silently during the housing crisis, talking about bike lanes or talking about just basic issues and not really offering solutions.
It might not sound like it, but the person bashing the Nonpartisan Association, or the NPA, and Vision Vancouver, two of Vancouver's most powerful parties, was until recently a prominent member of one of them. His name is Hector Bremner, and he was elected to City Council under the NPA's banner in the October 2017 by-election. Hector is now running again, but this time for mayor in Vancouver's upcoming 2018 civic election. And he's no longer with the NPA. Instead of running with the NPA, Hector Bremner has started his own party. Yes, Vancouver.
The answer is saying yes to working families. The answer is saying yes to small businesses. The answer is saying yes to those struggling to make ends meet. And yes to those trying to build a better future for our kids right here in a city where everyone is welcome. And it's going to take a party where everyone is welcome.
So Yes Vancouver held a candidate selection meeting on July 28th at the Polish Community Centre on Fraser at King Ed. Here they announced their 5 city council nominees, 1 school board nominee, and 1 parks board nominee. And all of these people will run alongside Hector Bremner. Both the MPA and Yes Vancouver are economically on the right. But Yes Vancouver hopes to position itself more progressively on social issues. So Yes Vancouver supports causes like ending homelessness and building low-barrier social housing. And these stances are tied in with the party's approach to solving Vancouver's housing crisis. Ultimately, this is what differentiates them from the MPA. Bremner is described by Charlie Smith of the Georgia Straight as, quote, looking more like a GQ model than an insurgent ready to take over the government. But Smith adds, this first-term city councillor has grand ambitions to transform Vancouver. His first battle will be over housing. Here's Hector on the Linda Steele Show on CKNW.
Okay, so the prime priority has got to be housing affordability?
Correct. So it's obviously an issue that's affecting all of us, and it doesn't really matter where you are on the income spectrum. We're all leveraged to the hilt, even if we're renting, rents are climbing, and being evicted today, if you're renting an apartment that's owned by an individual and that individual decides to sell, there's a lot of people that are actually facing some pretty stark choices with the lack of availability. So we have a serious crisis in our city. It's time to take it seriously. It's time to park the gimmicks and the tactics and have a real strategy for Vancouver's future and making sure that we are leaving a Vancouver that's going to be livable and prosperous for our kids and our kids' kids.
Yes Vancouver's full platform hasn't been released as of the publishing of this podcast, but Hector's answer to the heated housing debate is to increase Vancouver's housing supply. For him, this is an economic strategy that attempts to address the city's housing needs while also fixing its social woes. According to Hector, his housing strategy is Economics 101. The strategy will take aim at economic factors contributing to our housing crisis, as well as many of the city's social issues, all without raising taxes. That is, if he can make it easier for developers to build more housing, that the housing crisis would be alleviated, and he also believes an increased housing supply will provide funds to deal with Vancouver's other pressing needs like social housing and drug addiction. But would this policy actually work? We weren't sure if this was so cut and dry, so we decided to confer with an expert.
My name is Kevin Milligan. I'm a professor at the Vancouver School of Economics, and I do research in the areas of public finance and labor economics.
We played Kevin a clip of CITR News Collective members, myself, Zubin Shroff Mehrabadi, and Alex DeBoer asking Hector Bremner about his economic plans at Yes Vancouver's candidate selection meeting.
Some of your candidates and yourself have talked about the importance of tackling our homelessness crisis as well as the opioid crisis, but I know that you're also not in favor of raising taxes. So I'm wondering, don't you need taxes to provide services for those things, or do you think housing is enough for those two issues?
Well, it's the Warren Buffett rule of compounding interest. You actually, by cheating ourselves, by having fewer taxable doors, fewer taxable square feet of commercial space, as we do, we actually are lowering our revenue. We're actually under earning what we need to deliver what we need to deliver. But what we're doing is we're raising taxes on the same. So let's say, if 10 people go for dinner and one person has to pay, that's not fun. But if all 10 people chip in, then obviously it's more affordable.
So you're saying with more businesses and more people living here, there will be more taxes?
That's right. So what we need to do is, as we grow and we have a more vibrant economy, and keeping in mind, building housing means a lot more construction workers, a lot more drywallers and plumbers and electricians and those suppliers of those businesses. And there is this downline economy that is created, and that all drives revenue back into the city. And then they start, going back to the restaurants, and they're, going out and, the arts and entertainment industry thrives when people have expendable dollars. But right now, the housing cost, because we've stunted the growth of housing, has made it so expensive. It's eating up their entertainment dollars. It's eating up their discretionary spending. And so we need a vibrant economy, and so building more housing generates us more revenue without having to increase taxation rates, because we're able to do volume.
Okay, that was the clip. So first of all, we were wondering, Hector Bremner sort of right away mentions the Warren Buffett rule of compounding interest, which I believe is actually more of a business rule. But I was wondering if you are familiar with that?
I know what compound interest is. I know who Warren Buffett is, but I don't know how they appear in the same sentence.
Okay, that's fair.
They may, I just don't know about it.
Although Kevin is not familiar with the Warren Buffett rule of compounding interest, he does think that a lot of what Hector says makes sense. By increasing the housing supply, we could increase the tax base and thus tax revenue.
Making it easier to build, you increase the number of doors that you're taxing, and there's a lot of sense in that, so that you can increase the tax base by having more housing supply, which might mean lower prices, but more tax base through more activity by allowing more people to find housing that meets their needs.
So here's the logic. Hector wants to make it easier for developers to build in Vancouver. The increase in housing supply could expand the tax base, which in turn increases tax revenue for social services. Kevin thinks that all of this could actually work. But Hector is also not in favor of raising taxes. Is his economic strategy of increasing housing supply to alleviate Vancouver's housing and social woes enough?
There's this idea of being fiscally conservative but socially liberal. And I'm just wondering if those two things can coexist. If we increase housing, will we just make more tax revenue and then be able to use that for social causes like ending homelessness, or do we need more than that?
The idea that all we need to do is decrease zoning and sit back and the magic market will solve the problems. It's not a view I would subscribe to. It certainly is something that would be beneficial, but there's also things you could do on the regulation side. So as an example, you imagine you really free up the zoning and allow stuff to be built, and you find that the mix of housing is being built under that new zoning regime isn't allowing all kinds of families to get the housing they need, especially those at the lower end of the income spectrum. Well, there's kind of two ways you could approach that. One is you let the market build all that stuff, you tax it in some way, then you take that money and you build social housing. That's one approach. Another approach you could take is one that we have taken to a certain degree here in Vancouver, which is you don't just let builders build whatever they want. You impose on them that a certain percent of units have to be social housing or a certain percent of units have to be for rent. Those are two approaches that cities can take. You kind of implicitly tax the developers by forcing them to provide some social housing, or you explicitly tax them by letting them build what they want, taking the money, and building the social housing yourself. I don't have a strong opinion about which way is better, but I think that it is wise to contemplate that you're going to have to do something, most likely, beyond just let the zoning take care of everything.
Hector Bremner talked about how increasing the housing supply would also increase construction and jobs related to that industry, and this would all stimulate the economy further. We asked Kevin whether Hector's ideas have roots in basic economic theory.
It is certainly true that by removing zoning restrictions, you're going to most likely have more construction activity. What's interesting is the unemployment rate in Vancouver is extraordinarily low. It's not clear to me that what the city actually needs is a whole bunch more construction activity in terms of economic activity that is lacking. But there would certainly be more activity. I don't use the phrase trickle-down stuff because I really don't know what it means. There would be economic activity generated that would have an impact on that sector and then also on other sectors as people in the construction sector spend their money. So if that be trickle-down, that's what it is.
With the election coming up on October 20, there's many different policy proposals being put forward by civic parties to tackle the housing crisis. All the parties claim that they have the golden key, but as Kevin Milligan highlights, we're going to need more. We're going to need a wide array of policies to solve this crisis.
In the provincial budget, I don't have the number in front of me, but they had a housing plan that had like 30 different action items or something like that. They had a broad suite of measures that they took. Some of them perhaps will be a bit more successful than others, including that was the school tax is one of those 30 measures. I think that's the right approach, is take a portfolio of policies to the problem, not put all of your eggs in one basket, be it zoning or social housing or property tax, but to have use all the policy tools available, and you want to use all the tools that are available because this is a crisis facing young people, facing those who are struggling, and people who want to live in Vancouver. And I think that we can solve these things with the policy tools available to us. We just have to have voters step out there and vote.
This story was written and produced by Alex DeBoer, Zubin Shroff-Merabadi, Adeline Peng, and myself, Olamide Olaniyan.
Special thanks to Kevin Milligan, and music in this episode was by the Pawpaws and the Bluebirds, and our theme music is by the illustrious Artem Bemba.
Hello. That was a piece on Yes Vancouver called Econ 101, made mostly by Zubin and Ola. So really proud to see that piece finally get done. It took us a while to get to, since August was not a good time to try to interview professors, as it turns out. So you're listening to Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. My name is Alex DeBoer. That is your show for today. As I mentioned at the top of the show, it's a bit short, but we are always busy producing content, so we do as much as we can. And if you're interested in hearing the pieces that we played today, again, they will be on Seeking Office, our civil politics podcast, shortly after the broadcast, hopefully tonight. I'll be putting them up. So if you haven't already listened to our podcast and you're wanting to know more about Vancouver's 2018 municipal election, if you want to know more parties that are running, what they're all about, what the issues are, I would recommend downloading some episodes of Seeking Office and finding out. You can get Seeking Office on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you download your podcasts. It's also available on our website at citr.ca if you search Seeking Office, but that's maybe not the most convenient way. So thank you very much for tuning in to Democracy Watch. We'll be back again next Thursday at 5 p.m. with more local news. Up next, we have either Flashback or No Dead Air. Not sure because those shows rotate. But for now, we're going to Auto DJ. So thanks very much for listening and have a great night.